There's going to be differences in the way people experience food security between urban locations and rural locations, whether it's about accessing the land that they need, the inputs that they need, questions about infrastructure and opportunity. So in urban areas it's often much easier to get to markets, and you're able to respond to perhaps changing diets, people having different preferences. If people want to have diversity in the food, particularly as that relates to their nutritional benefits, then being able to afford a diversity of food for your nutritional intake is very important.
In a given region, quite a lot of a person's diet can be grown in the locality and is grown in the locality and will be purchased through local markets or even directly through the farm. So in some areas of the EU you can see that still a very, very strong bond, if you like, between the land and the people, both in the rural area and the wider urban area. In other areas, the direct connectivity between the people living in that area and the food that's grown in that area is perhaps less, and they're buying food at local markets or local supermarkets, which is essentially grown elsewhere, could be elsewhere in that country, could be elsewhere in the world, but is being grown elsewhere and brought to that central supermarket or market for sale.
This level of intensification, we're also seeing that in Europe. We're seeing this in the UK, the quote-unquote super farms, where the average family farm in the UK was around 113, for example, dairy cattle. The super farm level is moving this up to 1,000 animals. So the trend in the UK is for economies of scale and intensification.
People always think of land, traditionally, that's where we produce our food. But nowadays, if you think about the UK, for example, 1% of the population work in agriculture, actually in food production. That's a very small proportion. But there's lots of other people out there who like the countryside. So the question is, what is the countryside for? Is it for food production? Or is it for environmental benefits, for recreation? Is it for wind farms? What is it for?
In some countries in Europe, the way in which land is inherited and passed on to different generations means that each time it's passed on it is split, so that you tend to get lots and lots of smaller parcels. In other areas, we've seen a coming together, an enlarging of farms, so that we get, as I say, in some areas of France, in some areas of Spain, you can get some very large farms, several hundreds of hectares, and that runs right through from less than a hectare in some other parts of Europe. The degree of connectiveness between rural areas and urban areas is equally as diverse. And as you may expect, where there's many small farms, often part-time farmers farming fairly small areas of land, say for instance in Greece, the connectiveness between rural and urban areas is perhaps greater. But in other areas where you've got these very large farms with fewer people working on the farm, a much larger area, often the connectiveness between rural and urban is a lot less. On average, the number of farmers per unit area is less in the UK, there's less farm workers. But there is still a range of small market gardens, allotments and interest in community farming, both in cities and around cities. But that's probably not as great as some of the other areas in Europe where we've got lots and lots of very small farms and a greater connectiveness.
Countries have natural advantages in producing different products. As well as that, there are costs associated again with technology. So we tend in farms in the UK and many parts of Europe to have the up-to-date technologies that reduce costs and increase efficiency. In addition, there are transaction costs. In other words, food has to be moved, production has to be moved from one area to another, wherever it's needed. In Europe, we have a very strong consumption base, and so to produce the food here reduces the cost of transport, whereas if we're importing from New Zealand, Australia and so on, obviously the costs of that transport are much higher.
The European consumers, particularly, I expect this is true throughout the world, but it's particularly true here, are very fussy or very discriminating about the quality of what they get. Even though nutritional quality might not be reduced, the blemishes that you've got, say on an apple that you buy, you might not be happy about it, but actually sometimes it won't do you any damage. So quality is also a factor, and that can of course lead to wastage because farmers have to dispose of stuff. We do have solutions to that. Partly we can sell stuff which is second grade. Maybe the carrots have got chopped off at the bottom, they don't look quite complete, you know. But even at that level, people are very fussy. European consumers are also very fussy about prices, and they don't want to pay more than they need to. And so if you think about that in terms of production, sometimes we are happy to export some of the problems we have to other countries. So if you think about animal welfare, we would be quite comfortable to buy cheap meat which has come from some other place in the world where animal welfare doesn't meet the standards we expect of our European farmers. And so there's an issue there, and I don't know that there's an easy solution to that.